Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Zinnov Podcast Business Resilience Series. Today I'm thrilled to be joined by two exceptional leaders from PTC, Catherine Kniker, who also goes by CK, Chief Marketing and Sustainability Officer, and Dave Duncan, Head of Sustainability, to discuss their vision, how product sustainability can improve both our environment and business success. Welcome CK and Dave. CK, your extensive experience across sustainability, corporate development, strategy, and marketing is impressive. And Dave, with your 12 years of PTC, your vision for driving sustainability is truly inspiring. Before we dive into our main topic, I'd love to hear a bit about what sparked your passion for sustainability.
First, thank you, Pari, for hosting us. We're delighted anytime we get a chance to speak on the topic of sustainability. Maybe two things for me. One is personal and one was more business related. Having grown up in a farm in Ireland, I didn't realize how sustainable I grew up. We had chickens, we had milk, we had vegetables or whatever. And then over time, I came to see how much food waste there was in the world. So food is a basic human need. And in some parts of the world, there's a lot of it thrown away, and in other parts of the world, people are saving. So that was always like how do I do something about that? And then moving to PTC, you suddenly realize that 54% of the world's energy is being consumed by manufacturers. Those self-same manufacturers are using more of the Earth's materials than the Earth has capacity for, and waste, different kind of waste, is at an all-time high. So those two things, when I looked at it from a strategy perspective for PTC, I was like, this is an enormous opportunity to do something at scale that would be meaningful in the world, and to combine your career and your passion for doing something good. It's just a wonderful opportunity.
That's a luxury in life.
Luxury in life and a privilege.
Yeah.
Yeah, my origin story is pretty much the exact opposite of CK's, where she grew up in a very responsible, sustainable, rural way.
Without knowing it.
I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut in the 70s and 80s with my mom's side of the family from Boston, my dad's side of the family from New York. So my passion was initially around, I grew up in a filthy environment. Cars polluted a ton. The air was full of smog, litter all over the ground. So as a child, those are things that I knew were wrong, and I was always a cheerleader for things like solar panels, electric vehicles, and things that were, largely the playground of wealthy people's hobbyists as we were growing up. And professionally, more and more as we followed the discipline, it became clear to me that a sustainable way of living was becoming the more financially beneficial way of living. So it was a great time to pivot into the field.
Super.
And when we decided to really double down on the sustainability topic at PTC, I had no idea that Dave had this passion. And so I was looking for a head of sustainability. And then through just an accidental conversation, I realized how passionate he was about the topic of sustainability and how knowledgeable he was about our entire product portfolio and our entire customer set. And so it was a marriage made in heaven to have Dave run sustainability for PTC.
Awesome. It was great to see how it all came together.
Yeah. Sometimes better lucky than smart, but this was great.
So we'll start with customers. And how has the customer expectation on sustainability solutions changed over time, and how is it informing business strategy of PTC?
Yeah, I think in general, if you look at end-to-end customer sentiment, like for consumer goods, whether it's the clothes that we wear or the cars that we drive, I think in general, people would prefer a more sustainable option than the traditional dirtier option. And previously, that came with a high price point, but that's the gap there is starting to close, and there's a far greater preference from the end customer perspective to go with the greener option. And we're seeing that across industries. That's not just limited to one industry. So that presents a huge opportunity for the manufacturers of goods. Would you agree?
Yeah, completely agree.
And Dave, you've been working on this vision for sustainability, product sustainability for PTC. What is the role of sustainability across the product life cycle?
Yes, I think to put it in simpler terms, at least the right focus for discrete manufacturing. For listeners that aren't familiar with what discrete manufacturing is, these are, I would say, machines at any levels, anything from a toaster oven or a battleship, anything in between, toaster ovens, MRI machines, anything that you can drop on your foot and it hurts. That's where we specialize and we focus. And for those types of products, it's really about the materials that you use and reducing the amount of fossil energy used in that value chain are really the priorities for us. Because the impact from discrete products are, one, hazardous material leakage into the air, water, or land. Secondly, carbon pollution, which may be the most urgent thing to solve for. And then third is finite material preservation. If we keep burning and burying used metals as well as fossil fuels, then we lose some of those value chains for future generations. And towards that, I think if we look at some customer examples, just to storytell a little bit about how this comes into practice in our industries and where digital software can help, is across the product life cycle, which roughly goes from design to manufacture to service and then circulating material back into those flows. At the front end of that in design, where material is your biggest consideration because of its embodied carbon, also it could be toxic, and is it recoverable? To give an AI example with generative design using CAD, or computer assisted design, is I'll take some examples from our previous impact reports since they're public. Cummins engines, as an example. They make diesel engines as well as alternative fuel power generation. One of the biggest things that's necessary for a mobile asset is to reduce its weight, because it makes it lighter. It's much more energy efficient, and it's also less expensive, so it saves the group money. And by using generative design, which can take material out of a design while still preserving its performance and thermal capabilities, oftentimes they can take up to 20-30% of the weight out of these designs. Really, with the press of a button, one of the directors from Cummins noted that he had 30 years of mechanical engineering experience, and there were new hires out of college that could press these buttons, come up with much more elegant designs than he ever could have. So that's one way where digital engineering can really help to improve sustainability.
Very interesting. And you also talked about circularity in the product lifecycle management. Yes. And you talk to anybody on circularity, they always think about recycling. But I think you have a more broader perspective around.
We do, yes. So for circularity, a term that's used in our industry is called REX. And there's a order of priority that you want to take. The first is reduce, which is reduce the amount of material that you use in the first place. Like
Cummins example.
Right, and then the next would be to repair. After that, would be to refurbish or remanufacture. And really, as a last resort, would be to recycle. Therefore, our industries focus on a few things there. Well, we covered the reduce, but more and more, the products that our customers produce are durable goods, and they can be repaired. And at end of life, or when a service part is changed, it's typically much more advantageous to refurbish or remanufacture those parts or that entire product than it is to shred it down or melt it down into its primary materials and then reinvest in all that energy to bring it up. And modular design facilitates both the supply and demand for those remanufactured and refurbished parts. So we do a significant amount of work both with software and hardware to facilitate those modular products.
So super interesting. And CK, coming to you, and Dave mentioned about AI, touched upon generative AI. And if you look at Jensen Huang, he talks about physical AI is a main thing in the next decade. And I was listening to an Eric Schmidt interview yesterday. He said in the future, 98% of, or 90-some% of energy consumption is going to be based on AI. So we're talking about sustainability, and AI is going to consume a lot of energy. But AI also reducing the number of mechanical components required in a particular product, so that it reduces carbon. So how do you see a role of AI in all of this?
Well, I mean, Jensen is talking a lot these days about physical AI, and I see that coming to life, particularly how it transforms how companies think about their product and product as a service, as opposed to the one-time capital outlay. And you could see that across industries. Like if you take car industry, for instance, most of the time a car sits idle. You have a car, I have a car. Well, I assume you have a car.
I haven't taken it out in a month.
Yeah. So probably 90+% of the time, the vehicles that are purchased are not being used. So if you thought about autonomous driving, so physical AI in the car world, you could see the need for far less cars, far better utilization of the cars that exist, and therefore a lot lower footprint based on all of that. I think it's going to take a little while to get there, but we're moving along pretty quickly. And that's just the car industry. You could apply the same thing almost across every industry, or the devices that are sitting in factories. A lot of times their utilization is limited by the human interaction with them. So maybe you need smaller factories than the bigger factories that we have today. So I think it'll have a very fundamental impact over time. So energy up for AI factories, carbon footprint down because you need less things potentially produced, or better utilization of what exists.
On the energy side, you might have other ways to create more renewable energy. For sure.
And, as chips get faster, again, technology isn't going to stand still in the AI front either. And I think you'll start to see much more efficient architectures, just as happened in every chip design. Moore's Law has happened over and over again. And I think, all of that will happen over time.
Absolutely. And one other thing about sustainability, when you talk to clients, it's always about, is it going to be expensive to build sustainable products? So there's always this question of cost is going to be higher for sustainability. Is it a myth or a reality?
In the right context, it's a myth. I'll concede that today, if you want to make a net zero, 100% circular product, it's going to cost more money. You're going to need a green premium. But if you're following some science-backed pathways to iterate towards, say, net zero for carbon pollution by 2050, or some other circularity or hazardous material methods, you can achieve 50% of that entire goal, like let's say towards net zero by 2050, profitably today with approaches that are available today. We gave you the example from Cummins earlier, where material reduction is proportionate to the amount of embodied carbon that's reduced from that product as well. And there's other methods around. So really, anytime that you emit carbon, it costs you money to emit that carbon. That could be from an inefficient manufacturing process. It could be from a unnecessary expedited ship of a service part, unnecessary dispatch of a technician. It could also be from unnecessary repeat of energy to recreate a part or a product that could have been refurbished or remanufactured. So there's all sorts of dials that can be tuned today that companies should do anyway for financial reasons. And debunking that myth is really the point and the central theme of the book that we wrote, Product Sustainability for Dummies, that is really grounded in this business sense in terms of what are the things that you should do right now that your CFO will give you a high five on for financial reasons? And then what are some mid or longer term considerations to do that maybe harder half that maybe you start 5 years from now or 7 years from now, and keep an eye on some of the scaling approaches for.
So you can be sustainable and profitable.
Right, exactly.
And in fact, for initiatives to work, you actually want to make sure you hone in on those, where those two things are true.
Early on.
For sure.
And so what are other trends which you're seeing in overall product sustainability?
Well, decarbonization, there's a lot of talk about it, and it's visible and it's urgent. But Dave mentioned earlier the word circularity, and we both believe, and at PTC, we believe strongly that circularity is the place where our customers should really focus because of some of the reasons that Dave mentioned. First, in a circular economy, you're using less material, so less of the raw goods, which we don't have enough capacity in the Earth's supply. So that's a good thing. And it also helps decarbonization, et cetera. But then maybe the second reason to want to care about that is exactly what Dave talked about, that it can be more profitable than a linear process. So just think about if you're reusing, remanufacturing, and last case, recycling. But the reuse and the remanufacturing, you're using less resources. You don't have to go and mine to get the raw materials out of the ground. You don't have to do the material processing. You don't have to go and do the manufacturing steps. So you're having an impact there alone. And then I would say it also helps from a supply chain perspective, because you can use all of the goods that are already within your company. And then I'd say the other trend that we haven't really touched on is the fact that where regulation is going to drive companies. So this notion of a digital product passport, companies needing to have that will force the circularity motion, I think, even quicker than it would have happened naturally by itself. And that's just one regulation. There's plenty of others.
Interesting. And I'm pretty sure the tariffs and others will also play a role in this from a circularity perspective, so people can keep things within. And
it's easy to think these days in the US that sustainability maybe isn't as cool as it was, but the reality is all of our customers still need to execute on their sustainability programs. We're seeing that across the board and globally.
Great. And we talked about why sustainability and some of the trends. If an executive, maybe a head of engineering or head of sustainability, new to the role, want to get started, how do they get started, Dave?
Right. There's a lot of answers to that that we cover in the book, but I'll cover a couple high points. As CK mentioned, in discrete manufacturing, circularity will yield the biggest, not only financial benefits, but also product footprint benefits as well. Something that's not intuitive to a lot of people is the factory for a discrete manufacturer is only 1 to 10% of the emissions of the company. Like most of it, for most products that don't use a ton of energy, let me qualify this. So about 1 to 10% is in the factory. For a typical product, 80% or more is from the upstream components and materials that arrive at the factory receiving dock. And that's what circularity promises to not repeat in terms of that energy that's needed for those materials and parts. If they can come back to the factory, then one, you avoid repeating all of that energy emissions from the material processing, earlier tier manufacturing, et cetera. But then two, you save all that cost as well. So I would say there's two best practices across the life cycle to focus on. One would be modular design. And intuitively looking at Lego is an example of modular design where we played with Legos when we were children. My children did, and my children now have refused to let me give away those Legos and want to keep them for a future generation.
My daughter is 23 years old. Yeah. She still plays with Lego.
Yeah, everybody plays with Legos.
Yeah, mine does too, 22 and 15. And the first set we got was a SpongeBob Krusty Krab when my son was probably 4 years old. And he's probably done with SpongeBob when he was 5 or 6 years old. And when he was, he could disassemble that and build that into a pirate ship or whatever else. And it's very similar with modular design, where you have a limited amount of parts in your product portfolio. And as they cycle back, many of those parts are not life limited and can just be reused right away. Others might need to be remanufactured, but they can stack up into new configurations. So it's really that the same classic design and modularity attitude that's needed. And it's not limited to just hardware, but also the software. If we think of take a modern EV as an example, electric vehicle, what they call the skateboard. The skateboard of an electric vehicle is the floorboard and the frame with a battery pack and the 1 or 2 electric motors on the wheels. It's largely a perfected design and it can last several generations of vehicles. But if those electric motors or those batteries, which are modularly designed, don't have modular software associated with them in its next function, it's not usable. Like the best you can do is melt it down and recycle it. So if you have car variant A and then for generation 2 you have car variant B, you need that design foresight to have modular software pair with the modular hardware so that kit can continue to be used, because more and more software, electronics, and mechanical designs need to be held together.
So people are starting to think about it, modular design, circularity. So it seems like the key, which have maximum impact for them to start with, and then they can go on to the larger list. Hopefully they'll read your book to get more.
Yep. Exactly. And then there's some notions in terms of how do you bring modularity to the field, because you have so much variation with modularity, and to be able to use those engineering definitions to decipher configuration-specific instructions for frontline workers, for manufacturing in the factory, servicing in the field, and ultimately end-of-life disassembly and sending back the parts with all that variability complexity. That simplifies it greatly and makes that more achievable and profitable.
And what's exciting for us is our core offerings help our customers do this. We continue to add capabilities, but it's at the heart of what PLM is. It's at the heart of what ALM is. If you define the requirements in a sustainable way, it leads to a huge amount of downstream benefits. And so I'd say that's one of the reasons we're quite passionate about it. It's good for the world, and it's good for business, and good for our customers.
Sustainability is revenue growth for PTC.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think just in general, I think that needs to be true to make it stick and hold across industries.
Super. And CK, I've known you for the last decade. We have done a lot of work in these 10 years. And one interesting thing is every few years you are getting yourself out of comfort zone to something you've not done before. Yeah. You get that done, you move into the next one. Like, what are some of the leadership traits for people to do this?
Yeah, I mean, for me, at this stage in my career, I realize I'm a builder. And once the problem is solved, I like to move on to the next challenge. And maybe from a leadership principle perspective, leaving things better than you found. And this actually translates to whether it's the project that you're on, can you move it ahead? Whether it's the organization, like, did you build the leaders of tomorrow? Did you help develop them? And from a sustainability perspective, I mean, this is where it really, this role has filled my cup doth runneth over, because it's leaving the world in a better place. And I don't mean to be pithy about that, but the scale of impact that we can have if our customers leverage the tools and solutions to build more sustainable products and to have sustainability embedded throughout the value chain is enormous. Like, I couldn't ever wish to have that impact alone. And so it's very motivating.
Yeah, that's inspiring.
And satisfying.
It's inspiring for others.
Yeah.
Dave, this podcast is about a business resilience series. Mm-hmm. We talk quite a bit about how sustainability helps in revenue growth and profitability. Is sustainability also help with business resilience? Maybe give a couple of examples.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I'll give a near-term example, since there's a near-term horizon and a long-term horizon. Maybe a little storytelling here is we have a mining manufacturing customer of ours. They make big mining drills in Europe, and they deploy them to various mining facilities around the world. And just as a side note, mining is really essential over the next 20 years and is going to increase, because if we're going to keep more oil and gas in the ground rather than burn it, we need to bring more metals and minerals above ground to facilitate the grids, the batteries, the solar panels, the turbines, the other things in the new energy infrastructure. So mining is not a villain in this at all. We need to.
Sounds counterintuitive, but
exactly.
it's not.
Right?
Yeah.
So we need to support mining, bringing this up, but at the same time, keeping that circulated, so we don't have to keep digging in the ground for more and more over time. But I digress. This mining company, they are able to offer a remanufactured drill with 80% less footprint for their customers, lower cost for their customers, like new warranty, and higher profitability for themselves. So more and more their customers are saying, hey, if you have a remanufactured drill, I would rather have that than a new one. And something that they did to further improve the footprint of the remanufactured drills is they realized that, well, we have these drills in like rural Alaska or the Andes or Australia, and we're losing a lot of cost and footprint by bringing these back centrally to Europe to remanufacture. And remanufacturing is a little bit simpler than initial manufacturing, so they're able to do distributed manufacturing of these modular products locally in these economies. So fast forward to 2025, where a few things are happening. There's increased risk with tariffs. There's also increased risk with China and other countries not exporting some of these rare materials that are needed for not only electronics, but other fundamental aspects of design. And this company is far more resilient in the near term because of that, because they can have local manufacturing within the regions and perpetually keep some of these rare, more critical minerals and materials in their products.
So it's back to circularity again.
Right.
That key theme of circularity. It also drives resilience.
Yeah, it seems like, thanks a lot, CK and Dave. Sustainability is not just good for our next generations, but it's profitable, increases revenue, and also makes business resilient.
Absolutely.
Why not go for it?
Go for it.
A big thank you to our listeners for tuning in to this episode of Business Resilience. I'm your host, Pari Natarajan. See you in the next episode.